Everyone, it says I'm live, so if that's the case, please let me know in the chat if you can hear me and see me as well, although that part is much less relevant. Thank you all for being here on another Monday Night Live, where we're going to discuss some of the events from the previous week. And tonight's focus is going to be heavily on the fact that you should be preparing as if you are at war, because we are at war, whether or not anything has been publicly declared. There's a lot happening in our world right now, and you have to change your preparedness mindset to that of a wartime mindset in order to anticipate any threat that might occur here in the near future. And that has been demonstrated to us here just recently. And we need to evaluate and analyze some of those events in order to be better prepared moving forward into the future. And tonight's live stream, we're going to discuss how a lot of things. We're going to start off with the fact that even if you're in a nice place, that no longer means you have inherent protection. We're going to talk about the equipment and some of the tactics that were used, and that way we can be better set strategically in order to anticipate some of those similar tactics and equipment to be used if we ever find ourselves in a similar situation. We're going to talk about the response time from security forces and the police and how we can apply that to our own preparedness here in countries like the United States, as well as anywhere else you might be checking in from. And we're going to talk about some of the small arms and the armor expectations of use from some of these guerrilla entities in order to anticipate some of that threat as well. And also, we're going to touch on the fog of war and international involvement in order to better understand how we are already in this war that everybody's been talking about for quite some time, and that no one is safe from being a target any longer. And every country that's involved in this current global catastrophe has civilians and innocent life that will not be spared because of the implications of being within a war. So this is what we're talking about tonight, and there's quite a bit to go over. Now, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest sponsor of the channel, and they are supporting this live stream, and thanks to them, I'm able to get this information out to everyone and hopefully help you prepare that much better. So thank you to Midway USA. Now, before we get started tonight, I do want to talk about just something to touch base on before we get moving, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and show you the image that was used for tonight's thumbnail to just give you some perspective, okay? Regardless of ideological or historical complexity, the barbarism that we're currently witnessing is unacceptable. And it should be expected if this level of conflict spreads further throughout the globe. So I don't care what side of this argument you might be on. What we're witnessing should not be acceptable to any other human being. And I do want you to understand that this whole choose a side scenario is also part of the equation. It's fifth generation warfare to a T. To divide us even further over such emotionally driven events accomplishes the goals of those who would like to move us into a more totalitarian state. So understand that everyone involved in this, and when you talk about the big players, of course, we have the usuals, right? China, Russia, even ourselves, the United States. Everyone involved has an agenda and pushes things into a certain direction. And one of the best tools they have at their leisure is division. And by using division, they can create quite a bit of chaos. And from chaos, they can take more power. So please understand that you have to look at these things through a lens other than what emotionally drives you in order to get into an argument, right? The argument is the goal, and that mission is accomplished once you engage. What we should be able to do as human beings is say that what we're witnessing is unacceptable and should not be allowed to happen, regardless of anyone's background, history, or origin. Okay? That's how I want to get this started, because I know there's a lot of strange conversation happening on the internet. And in case you haven't noticed, I haven't posted a video in a couple of days, which is, I guess, not that long, but also longer than usual for me. And that's because I needed some time to digest some of this information. We've had information overload. We've had the fog of war, of course. And it's just a shocking event that required me to take some time to really meditate on the entire situation. When I say that, I don't mean like a hippie sitting in my front yard with my legs crossed. I meant just to spend enough time dwelling on the entire topic in order to present it in a way that gives you a solution rather than just to regurgitate the news. And that's my goal here tonight. So hopefully we can all be on the same page and discuss what it is we need to do to get our mindset right for what's coming. Okay? First and foremost, this image that you're seeing right now is from a neighborhood that I would classify as what looks to be a nice neighborhood. This should remind you that regardless of where you live, no matter how nice it might be, and no matter how secure you might feel because of it, there's a potential that one day that could all be completely upended. And even though you spend the money to be somewhere that is seemingly safe, you are not ever fully safe, right? And this attack that we recently witnessed shows and demonstrates just how unsafe you can be in the matter of minutes. So I wanted to kind of start this conversation off with the idea of shedding some of your comfort bias, get rid of some of your normalcy bias in the thought that you're untouchable, you're immune to this because of where you live or how well armed you are or how well trained you are or what kind of neighborhood you're in. I've recently had lots of comments that say things to the effect of, well, everyone in my neighborhood is, armed, and when something happens, we'll get together and set up roadblocks, and we're going to have an entire security patrol, and we'll be good to go. I think that's a great plan. Have you actually planned that, though? Have you actually coordinated with your neighbors and networked to the point of being able to establish that as a plan? Or is that just something you've considered and you're just hoping that when the time comes, that plan will be able to fall into place? Because I guarantee you, it won't just happen magically. So you do need to actually set those plans into motion and get rid of this concept that you're basically lying to yourself about in the sense of your security based on preconceived notions that don't really have anything to fall back on. So, this neighborhood, I guarantee you, never expected to have armed assailants going door to door doing atrocious acts. That's my opinion. I'm sure the people who were there felt the same way. Now, I do want to just go ahead and jump in here real quick to say hello to some people. Let's see here. Razor Wire is here. You say you're getting ready for everything that's coming our way, and I think that's a good idea. We've got Feder Lumpkin. That's quite the name, and honestly, it's hard to argue with. We also have Callie Prepper. So I'm sorry that I'm in the middle of another live feed that you like to watch, but it's Monday night and everybody's going live these days. And I've been doing this for like a long time now. So it's like my time slot, okay? I don't care if you're Tim Pool or not. I'm doing this. Anyhow, hello, Magic. Hello to you, Wooter Dude. Even though you said hi, I guess I'm just more proper, which is unfortunate. So that was the entire conversation surrounding a nice place no longer inherently gives you protection. Now let's move on to some of the equipment and the tactics that are being used so you can try to craft some of your future preparedness plans towards being ready for some similar type scenario. If you haven't correlated some of the activities at our southern border, as well as some of the unvetted people who have been let into this country over the years in the thousands that have ties to some of these groups that are currently being discussed all over mainstream media, then you haven't figured out that there are cells here within the country that could activate at any point in time. And I'm not just saying that to try to generate any type of fear or panic. That's not the goal of this conversation. The goal here is to try to help change your mindset towards a level of preparedness that would allow you to react to something like that occurring or to something like what we just witnessed. Okay. This is a solution driven conversation. That's what I'm hoping to do here. Okay. So the equipment and the tactics that were used can tell us a lot about what we should anticipate because let's get into it. There's some interesting parts of this equation that I thought were very eye opening. And I also thought was, let's just say, uh, indicative of what we could expect in the future. So, what were these tactics and what was the equipment that allowed them to pull some of this off? Okay. This article is from Reuters. Hamas deployed specialized units to attack Israel, says source. Okay. Now, we're going to come down here. Well, right here it says deployed a force of about 1,000 fighters. Now, I want you to understand that when we talk about military, we talk about troops in general. We talk about the thousands on a regular basis, right? Oh, they're sending 10,000 troops over to Europe. Oh, they're sending 5,000 troops on this aircraft carrier. They've got troops. We talk about them in the thousands, and it really starts to devalue the amount of people that actually represents. But 1,000 people is a lot of people, a lot of people. 1,000 people immediately overwhelms any localized force. And here in the United States, what would that be? It'd be your local police. It would be any kind of National Guard unit that might be nearby. And of course, if you're near a military base, that might be a little bit of a different ratio. But for most of us, most of the country, we have a localized police force, a sheriff's department, and then maybe, if you're lucky, a National Guard unit is somewhere in the vicinity. 1,000 people can do a lot of harm in a very short amount of time, and your response based on your locale is going to be heavily civilian driven because the police will be immediately overwhelmed with that size of a group. And 1,000 sounds like nothing when you constantly discuss military movements of troops. But in real life, if you were to look out your front door right now and 1,000 armed men were coming your way, your neighborhood can't stop 1,000 armed men, especially people who already have a plan of attack, already have communication set up, already have a strategy. It's just not going to work. So I really want you to try to consider this and understand that there are more than thousands of people like this here in the country already. Okay, training. A source close to Hamas said the group's fighters have been training in Gaza since the last conflict in 2021, on occasion conducting drills in plain sight. The exercises involve building a mock Israeli settlement to practice a military landing and training to storm it, the source said. Now, this kind of reminds me of doing some things that we do here in the preparedness community or in the firearms community. When you go out and get training and you do room clearing and you have a shoot house and things like that, that's how you get some of that realistic experience in order to properly defend yourself in a building. But most of us aren't going to have the opportunity to create a settlement to then enact a mission upon and use that as a training source. We're not going to have that opportunity, but these people are training in that fashion and to that degree. And that should tell you quite a bit when it comes to what they're willing to do and the resources they're willing to expend in order to ensure the success of their mission. I don't have the ability to create a fake settlement in order to see how I would react to an attack on it in the sense of us being defensive, because as Americans who are in America, we would be in a defensive posture if anything were to happen here. But these people have the resources to do that. So keep that in mind. But training is still a very important aspect of what it is you should be focused on when it comes to responding to something along these lines. Okay. We have the missile unit. At the start of the operation, Hamas said it had fired 3,000 rockets in a first barrage. Israel's military said 2,500 rockets were fired, logging the bombardment at about 6:30 in the morning. The rockets were intended to cause shock and confusion while providing Hamas fighters with cover to break through the fortified fence surrounding Gaza and carry out the operation. Now, of course, the rockets created quite a bit of confusion and quite a bit of cover. Now, apply that to what you might see here in the United States. They're not going to be attacking military installations in the United States in the same fashion that we saw with this attack. What they would be looking at for here would be critical infrastructure, strategic assets, and of course, according to what we witnessed, civilian targets are definitely on the table, which means your neighborhood, maybe your local community gathering centers, whether or not that is your grocery store, your school, whatever it is that your community focuses people into on a regular basis might be the target. A shopping mall, who knows? But what we do know is that they're going to use distraction and cover in order to be as effective as possible. They used missiles in this recent attack. What we can expect here, in my opinion, is going to be something regarding the grid, right? So you take out the lights and suddenly you have cover because suddenly everything is dark, and you have confusion and chaos because nobody likes when the lights are out regardless of the situation, let alone would they assume that they were under attack. It would take quite a bit of time for that realization to actually set in. So the airborne unit, teams of fighters on hang gliders or motorized paragliders flew over the border and secured the terrain for the main ground assault. This was inventive and it was effective. And this is the low tech approach to dealing with a more fortified and more well funded and equipped force. And they showed in this attack that they were able to do that even with these low tech options. And sometimes the least likely option is the one that's the most effective. So anticipate anything to be on the table when it comes to the avenue of approach. It doesn't mean they're going to take the most obvious highway, although they easily could here in the United States because no one would think twice about, I don't know, a U-Haul truck just driving down the road, right? But who knows how many fully armed men could be in a U-Haul truck, right? Not to mention all the other avenues of attack that are obviously possible, just showing how this situation worked out with this airborne unit. Elite Commando Ground. Now, this is the one that you should kind of consider here. This was a 400 strong elite force which broke through the fortified Gaza fence using explosives to open up gates so they could infiltrate to the Israeli side. After some crossed on motorcycles, bulldozers were used to widen the holes so teams could enter Israeli territory in four-wheel drive vehicles. Okay, so this is something you should definitely think about. Heavy equipment is everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's heavy equipment. There's no shortage of someone's ability to enter whatever facility sure that they would like to. With access to construction, heavy equipment throughout this country, any on the table, bulldozers were used in this situation. I have zero doubts that similar vehicles and equipment would be used here in the United States as well as any other country because of how abundant they are and how effective they are at creating holes, right? Not to mention the four-wheel drive vehicles. We saw motorcycles, we saw dirt bikes, we saw ATVs, we saw side-by-sides. We saw just about everything. It's not going to be conventional. And we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit, but I do think it'll make a lot more sense when you understand why this should be the expected force when it comes to their ability to transport. We're not going to necessarily see like tanks. We're not going to necessarily see what we usually envision when it comes to a military deployment of vehicles. They're using what everyone who lives in the woods has: four-wheel, motorbikes, dirt bikes, right? Drone unit. Drones were used for border surveillance. Drones will be used always and forever from now on. So keep that in mind. Do they have a limited runtime? Generally. Do they have a pilot somewhere who has to be in the vicinity? Yes. Are there things that you should be considering now in order to either track down or evade drones when it comes to tracking down the pilot or the origination location, or if it comes to having to evade detection at all from them? All those things are on the table at this point in time. They also had an intelligence unit that obviously provided intelligence throughout this process. All those things should be front and center when it comes to your own strategy and your own approach to trying to be more prepared for a wartime situation. And we are in a wartime scenario. I saw some people in the comments earlier asking, who are we at war with? Like, what are you talking about? We're not at war. Congress hasn't declared a war, right? The entire world is at war. Everything we're watching is just another battle of the greater war, not a localized event that has nothing to do with this entire conflict that we're currently witnessing. It's all connected to a degree. We're going to talk about that later tonight. But I guarantee you, like, we're in a war. The United States is backing Ukraine. The United States is backing Israel. Ukraine is at war. Israel is now at war. Everyone who's at war that is allied with anyone else now has drugged those allies into a war. And enemy of my enemy, right? We know exactly what's going on here. So if you are in an alliance with any of the countries involved, you have automatically become a target because you are part of a nation that is involved in this war at this. So don't confuse yourself with the concept that you have to wait till Congress declares war for you to feel like we're actually in one, because they don't really do that very often anymore. And I have a feeling we're not going to see that anytime soon, but we're going to be in a state of war during this entire process. Now, the equipment and the tactics that were used. One thing I just want to mention on that really quickly is that with your current personal protection plan, with your current, let's just say, Gracio Nemo, I'm not trying to fight with a noise gate, so maybe I'm just too far from the microphone. Let's just say you, and I'm going to actually move that just a little bit here to try to, there we go. Is that better? Let's just say this happens today. Do you have the ability to respond to anything like what you just witnessed in Israel? Do you? A lot of people are also very comfortable with their own level of preparedness because of the current environment we live in. And what I mean by that is, are you prepared to have multiple attackers show up at a location suddenly? And are you able to respond or evade or deal with the situation based on what you generally have on you? We're going to talk about that further here in just a minute. So, what about the response time? This response time was what you should expect in any situation. I do want to mention Exile Reviews. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for modding. I appreciate that. Squid is here. We also have Doggone It. I appreciate that. And my mic is fighting a war. I'm not sure what's up with the mic tonight, everybody. Does it sound better? Please let me know in the chat. I'm working on that, and I hope that it got better. So, all right. What about the response time? Liberty. All right. Sorry. Yes, it sounds better. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Everyone says 5x5. I think it was just angled in the wrong direction. So when something like this happens, a lot of Americans and a lot of Israelis, I'm sure, and a lot of people around the entire world, especially in modernized Western society, have become comfortable with the idea of having someone else do the job of personal protection for them. Mostly because of their government saying that that's no longer their job, right? Leave it to us, the police, leave it to the military, leave it to our security forces. You don't have to concern yourself with these situations because that's what our job is. And this situation right here should tell you that that's not necessarily going to be the case. And I don't care where you live and what country, expect a similar scenario to happen anywhere else because you can only do so much as a defensive force. If you're overwhelmed, you're overwhelmed. And there is a response time that's required to get to that place before security forces can be deployed. We see it all the time here in the United States when it comes to some of these active shooter scenarios. They show up to a place, some terrible events start to occur, and the police have to get there before they can do anything about it, right? Well, it's much worse when you're talking about thousands of active shooters rather than just one. So, this is from BBC. Why did it take Israel so long to deal with Hamas's attack from Gaza? It's from 5 hours ago. Where were the Israeli Defense Forces in those long hours as Hamas militants roamed at will around communities near Gaza, some are asking. The army completely failed as a quick reaction force, one Israeli said, pointing to how some of the communities that came under attack had to rely on their own civilian protection forces while they waited for the military to arrive. I mean, that sentence almost says it all right there. The full answer of why this happened will take some time to emerge, but it seems as if a surprise, scale, and speed overwhelmed defenses which were patchy and unprepared for what they faced. Surprise was crucial in Hamas's assault. Anything like this happens in the future, it will be a surprise attack. That's the only way for it to be successful, right? If the security forces find out about it ahead of time, and of course they're not implicated in some kind of crazy conspiracy, then they deal with the situation before it occurs. They find out where the operational center is and they take it out, or who knows what else, right? So because they were caught off guard, they were completely unprepared, and the response was bad, and they did not have a proper amount of defensive measures in place in order to deter this attack. How does your local area look when it comes to this? Can your local police and military units in the area respond quickly to an attack of this size that no one was prepared for? And in this country specifically, because keep in mind, and I want this to really kind of be driven home here. And like I said, we're not here to discuss ideology. We're here to discuss the events that occurred and how we can learn from them. And what we're learning is that even in Israel, a country that's always under threat of some sort of an attack and is basically at a constant state of war with other factions, even they were still caught off guard by a surprise attack. Now, apply that to the UK. Apply that to Canada. Apply that to the United States, where no one is walking around their daily life with the consideration that, hey, there might be a missile strike today. Hey, there might be an attack today, right? Nobody thinks like that generally. Most people go about their day without any concern for something like this occurring. So if the same situation were to occur here, the response and the preparation for it would be even that much worse because nobody thinks that it's possible. And because of that, they're not at a heightened state of alert and they're not making preparations for said scenario. Israel literally lives this every single day, and they still did not react quickly enough or have the proper countermeasures in place. That's just what happened. Heavy explosives and vehicles created as many as 80 breaches in the security fence. How many people would it require to actively guard and defend 80 separate breaches in a security fence? How many? Would you be able to do that? Think about your neighborhood right now, okay? How many ways could you get into your neighborhood by vehicle? Okay. Now, how many ways could you get into your neighborhood by foot? How many ways could you get into your neighborhood by air? And possibly, like when I grew up in Florida, many of my, let's just say, wealthier friends generally had boat docks. And how many ways could you get into their neighborhood by water? Now, consider all those different options and then think about how many people you would actually need to effectively defend your neighborhood against an attack of this size, against that many breaches in your security fence, which is the possible entrances within your secure zone. Is that something you're capable of? And I really want you to try to self-reflect and remove your bias of comfort from this equation so that when you say, well, everyone on my block has a gun and we have this plan that if something goes down, we're all going to get together and deal with it. Does everyone on your block understand how many vulnerabilities the neighborhood has? Or is the only concept that's been discussed to unite as a unit once that time comes and then deal with things as they occur? That's just not as sound of a strategy, but it is good that you've already started the conversation. Now we need to move into a wartime type situation. Now I keep saying that. Now I know people are asking, what are you talking about? We're not at war. I don't understand how we're at war. If every country in the world's at war, whatever country you're in is at war. And you are in somebody's opinion, reasonable target. And because of that, war can happen at your front door at any point. During World War II, there wasn't any misconception that something could happen on the mainland at any point in time, right? We know what happened in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor was attacked, right? So nobody was walking around during World War II while America was in this global conflict expecting everything to be constantly safe no matter what. Everyone did their part, right? Everyone donated their recyclable materials, their aluminum and everything else to the war effort. All the women went to work in the factories and all the men were out at war. Everyone did their part. That's not what we're doing now. Although we are already in this war in the same fashion that they were at war back then. But it's just not being labeled the same way because it doesn't create the type of environment that allows for more power to be taken from the population. Division is the name of the game right now, and it's very effective. And I can see it all over the internet when it comes to discussing the events that are happening right now. The lack of empathy from other human beings for what's happening to other human beings is a lot of the reason why we're in the situation we're in right now. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there. So, BWTI Lasseter 777. I hope I said that correctly. You know how they say every blade of grass here in Prescott, Arizona would be every rock. That's true. In North Dakota, it'd be behind every tree because we have very few trees, but we also have a very low population. So I think that would still add up to be just about right. And hey, I mean, I take a tree over a blade of grass in all honesty, except for the dead one I recently shot and found out that it was not cover at all, barely even concealing it. So let's go ahead and talk about the small arms scenario here, okay? The response time was bad, but that is expected for a surprise attack. That's the purpose of a surprise attack, all right? And I do want to mention something else that I think is important to kind of drive home. When you see these civilian targets being attacked directly, which the whole situation surrounding that and all of everything being shared on social media, it was atrocious, yeah. Like I said, I needed a whole weekend to kind of digest a lot of this information, be able to present it properly because I didn't want to become part of the echo chamber and I didn't want to regurgitate the news and I didn't want to hop on something without a better understanding as to what I wanted to say about it. So I appreciate everyone being patient with me. The attack on civilians. People ask why. Why would they attack civilians? Those weren't military targets. What's going on here? We're going to talk about that right now, but I guarantee you it's because it has an effect. It doesn't necessarily align with what, in my opinion, would be, proper morals, but it does create incitement. And that's what these groups are hoping to achieve through these horrendous attacks. Okay, so this is an article that's discussing what weapons do Israel and Hamas's militaries have. Now, we already know what's going on in Israel. Let's talk about Hamas. This is the guerrilla faction. This is the most likely type of enemy we face here in the United States because if it's a military invasion, our military will likely respond, and that becomes a completely different scenario. But I don't think that's the type of warfare we're in any longer. We're watching that happen in Ukraine, and I think that everyone's figured out that a war of attrition might not be the best for everybody when it comes to trying to gain some level of success. So we're watching guerrilla warfare in real time, and the expectation should be that this is the type of enemies we'll actually face, especially because they're already here and they have access to all of the equipment they used here in the United States just as easily. Because here, what can you buy? ATVs, four-wheelers, dirt bikes, firearms, paragliders, whatever you want, right? So Hamas is one of the most heavily armed guerrilla organizations in the world, Professor Clark says. It lacks the same type of armored vehicles as Israel for various reasons, including that it would be a very visible target for Israeli strikes, he says. Now, apply that to what we've learned from Ukraine. When Russia was parading their miles-long column of heavy armored vehicles, they were basically mocked because it seemed like a silly thing to do. And it was kind of like a show of pride or maybe, I don't know, just overconfidence. But regardless, that just doesn't work anymore. Not in these types of events and scenarios. Why? Because they're easy targets. Why would a guerrilla faction choose a bunch of MRAPs to drive down, I-95 and get easily taken out by an Apache? That doesn't make much sense at all now, does it? So armored vehicles are armored because they're targets. And they work in places where you have overwhelming force. But when you're operating under the guise of a guerrilla entity, you won't have overwhelming force pretty much no matter what, which is what Hamas understood when they crafted their plans for this horrendous attack. So, what did they use? Well, they used low-tech options that did the job effectively because they weren't obvious targets. And that's exactly what they're saying here. Armored vehicles are very visible targets for Israeli strikes, and that applies to anywhere else in the world. That's why it won't be so obvious as just tanks rolling down the street unless you get to a point in a war where it's an easy takeover and all it is an occupation. But this isn't where this conflict is at currently in that region, and that's what we're seeing happening in Eastern Europe. That's not as effective as everybody expected it to be for these exact reasons. They operate from utility vehicles like Land Rover Discoveries and mount a weapon on the back, like a 30 caliber heavy machine gun. These can be very mobile and have been used to devastating effect. Yes, we've all seen the technicals, and we know that they're effective, but that is what you should expect to see. And it won't be obvious. You won't have flags. You won't have things painted on the side in order to let you know exactly what's what. If you were in North Dakota, the best thing you could do if you wanted to be a guerrilla force to ensue or in order to enact chaos and create some kind of situation involving an attack, you would get a plain white F-150. Right? Or a plain white Dodge Ram or a plain white Chevy 1500. And the reason is because that's every fleet vehicle in the entire oil field. So they get these trucks and they start driving around and no one even thinks twice. No one. No one would think twice for a second. A plain white truck? Yep, there's like a million of them here. So that's what you should expect. And these are the tactics that you should expect. Don't think that they're going to put an obvious label on themselves and make them an obvious target at the same time. Like, it's just not how things are going to work out, and that's not what we just witnessed. Okay, so here's something else that I want everyone to kind of keep in mind. Remember how we were just talking about these attacks on civilians specifically? Asked how many fighters Hamas has, Professor Clark said that they have previously been estimated to have around 10,000. Okay, but added that when violence flares, they can mobilize lots of people. So their numbers can go from 10,000 committed Hamas people to anything up to 40 to 50,000. Why? Because the excessive violence incites those who were interested and maybe not fully committed now see the action and realize that what they thought might not have been possible is possible, and this might motivate them to join the cause. I don't think that that's morally sound, but what I do think is that it's probably very effective. And we're seeing that right now. They will gain in ranks because of this audacious attack. It will work well for them in the sense of morale. And it will also show their willingness to go above and beyond for their cause. And whether or not you agree with it, which I do not, but whether or not you do, they will use it to their advantage for recruitment. And they've already accomplished one goal by doing what they did, which is creating lots of division through emotional outburst here in the United States, as well as the rest of the global community. People are losing their minds because it's such a shocking and uncharacteristic event to witness in our day and age, that people are they're all over themselves. They don't know how to behave, right? And I understand that it's very shocking and it's very appalling. So because of that, mission accomplished for them. They will increase their ranks because they have driven out more of the types who are in agreement with them to say, "Yep, they're doing it, and now I'm here to do it as well." And they're going to create more and more division around the world, which only helps those who fund them and possibly support them throughout these scenarios. We'll talk about that here in just a minute because there is quite a bit to talk about when it comes to that. Now, speaking of quite a bit, I am releasing a new updated bug out bag video tomorrow. And in that video, I say quite a bit way too often. I rewatched the video today and I was like, good job, Magic Prepper. This is excellent. You've done very well here with your use of the English language. So while you're watching that video, if you want to turn it into some kind of a game where you do something every time I say quite a bit, it might not be very safe for you. So just be aware of that. But the new bug out bag video comes out tomorrow. I hope you guys check it out because it has some application to some of the things we're talking about right now. And I don't necessarily think I was driven to make some of those changes or updates because of this current situation, but it kind of shows where my mindset's been moving towards over the past couple of years. And I think that's where we all probably need to start heading because I can't keep approaching things as if we're immune or insulated from these types of attacks or these types of situations. Okay. Let's see here. Billy the Kid says that Gerald Ford is moving into position. Yeah. So we have a carrier strike group, heading in that direction right now. That's correct. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So another thing to talk about when it comes to small arms and armor. Okay. And this is just a reminder, which is an unfortunate one. U.S. weapons left behind in Afghanistan may have been among deadly tools Hamas used on civilians. Obviously, we all knew that this would happen, but this is what's happening. What are the weapons that are being used against us? Well, basically our own at this point. Authorities in Indian-controlled Kashmir told NBC that militants trying to annex Kashmir for Pakistan had never had access to M4s, M16s, and other U.S.-made arms and ammunition until the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The U.S. left approximately $7 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan, including aircraft, air-to-ground ammunitions, military vehicles, weapons, communications equipment, and other materials. According to the report, nearly 42,000 night vision, surveillance, biometric positioning equipment were also left behind. It's kind of a weird sentence. Additionally, 17,500 pieces of explosive detection, electronic countermeasure, disposal, and personal protective equipment also now have the potential of falling into the hands of Islamic militants, including Hamas. So, here's a picture of a Taliban fighter posing with U.S. weapons. You can see an entire rack of M4s behind him. He's got a bolt-action rifle, probably some sort of Remington 700, I would assume. And this is what you should expect. When I say that, what do I mean? At the minimum, here in the United States, if you're concerned about protecting yourself from an event like this, what are they using? They're using the same things that we generally promote here in this community. They're using small arms, intermediate cartridge rifles. So we're talking about AK-47s, AK-74s, and AR-15s, right? And then everything in between, but you understand what I'm saying when I say that. They're using handguns on occasion, of course, but generally it's rifles because that's the primary. And then we're also watching them wearing things like body armor, or at least at the bare minimum, plate carriers. They might not have armor inserts, but they do have the ability to have some load-bearing characteristics on their body where they're carrying additional ammo or medical or who knows what else. So basically, and this is just so you can consider this when you're trying to prepare and move your things forward into more of a wartime setting. Basically, they are using everything that you probably either have or want, okay? And when I say that, what I mean is they have night vision, you either do or you want it, right? They have rifles, you either have them or you want them. They have body armor, you either have it or you want it. But they also have things that are illegal that we aren't allowed to have. So they have explosive devices. They have fragmentation grenades. They have all the things that we don't have access to as civilians. So you have to prepare for the bare minimum, which is responding to a similar force as to what you have access to. And you also have to prepare for the additional options that they have due to not having to stay within the constraints of the law. So that means explosives, it means drones that are set up to utilize things like explosives. It means all kinds of stuff that we don't have. So you can't just rely on the fact that you have an AR-15. It comes down to having the additional equipment on hand if possible. And then the training is the most important aspect of that, because without the ability to use it appropriately, you're definitely not going to be effective. Okay. So now, and I just wanted to bring that back up because we have the Taliban actually having some discussions here, but that's a fog of war situation, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, because things are getting very interesting. If they take the repeater towers out, then we'll really have troubles. That's what the Watchman said. And I agree with you on that. It will be a big issue if that happens. I also saw Ian, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate it. Here's the plan, fam. We hold up in the local Buc-ee's. #Beaverines. Well, and that's the thing. These are plans that you need to have in place now, and they can't be so, what's the best way to say it? They cannot be so simplistic. You have to think harder, and you have to expect the unexpected. In the preparedness community, we've also often talked about obscurities for a long time. The craziest things that could happen, right? Now they're happening, but we're watching them happen, and we're almost becoming desensitized to the idea of it. This is SHTF, okay? This is actual SHTF. What you're watching right now is SHTF. Like that, we all thought it was going to be, like a zombie apocalypse. We all thought it was going to be like an asteroid, or the Cascadia subduction line or whatever. No, this is it, and it's dangerous, and it's militant, and it's violent. So you can't just prepare for a natural disaster anymore. We need to be ready to respond to an attack, regardless of how you want to look at it. That's the current condition of the planet. And while this war, which is global, by the way, that we're in, is raging on, everyone is at risk. We're all at risk. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, I mean, let's think about it. We just talked about some small arm solutions. So on you on a regular basis, like, do you have a rifle, a primary of some kind? Maybe it's a shotgun. I don't know how you roll. A primary of some kind. For me, that would be a rifle. Okay. Do you have that with you? Is it accessible? Are you able to access it? Okay. If you don't, maybe you can't for work or who knows what else. Okay. Do you have a handgun? Are you carrying concealed? Is your concealed carry handgun actually meant for fighting? Or is it meant for crime? We're no longer just preparing for crime. And I hope that we can move past that concept. I don't think a pocket 380 is going to cut it anymore. That's just how I feel about it. In fact, I'm actually carrying a Glock 19 again. Why? Because I like a lot of other guns better. I like carrying my X Macro because it's very comfortable, and it still has 17 round capacity, so it feels good. That gun was not designed for duty or for fighting. That gun was designed for self-defense scenarios in the guise of crime, right? Even crime is escalating to the point now where we're having home invasions involving multiple assailants. Crime is escalating to where it's always multiple assailants. We've seen the videos of people kicking in apartment doors. It's two people, not one, right? Will your pocket 380 or your J-frame revolver or your micro pistol be up to that task? Or would you want something that's more capable in that moment? If someone else has a rifle and you just don't because of circumstance, but you do have a handgun, do you want your handgun to be a 2.4-inch barrel with 5 shots, or do you want it to actually have some level of capability, possibly with an optic and maybe a light on it? That's why these things are moving into this new territory. It's not because everyone's trying to be tactical. It's because you want to give yourself the best chance possible. And the people who don't play by the rules aren't going to just not have body armor or not have a rifle. You might not have that capability based on circumstance, but you can do the best you can at least. And that's what we should be doing. And Clint Smith, right, famous firearms trainer, often says, I'm always going to carry the biggest gun that I can because if I need it, I want to be able to use it to the maximum proficiency available, right? Or something along those lines. I didn't quote him, but saying that that's his philosophy. And I agree with it at this point. So I'm back to a Glock 19. It's reliable. It's big enough to actually be duty capable. And if I end up not ever getting back home based on whatever happens, right? Some of the people who are involved with the situation probably still aren't home, right? So if I'm never going to get back home or who knows what, at least I'll have something that's a little bit more ubiquitous and has parts and magazines and availability and everything else. I don't like it. I like other guns much better. I'm not like a Glock fan, but I can understand where we are right now in the world. And I feel that I have to do better when it comes to my personal protection. I can't just assume crime is the name of the game anymore, because that's what a lot of the firearms industry has kind of been based around for decades in this country. And a P365 just isn't going to cut it for me if a sleeper cell activates in my area and multiple armed men with AK-47s show up. Are you going to even pull your micro pistol out? And I'm sorry, and I love my P365, but anyway, these are the things you got to consider. Are you bringing armor with you around? Do you have an IFAC? Like bare minimum, you need to have first aid at least. Do you have first aid? Do you have secondary communications available? Do you have a get home bag? Is your get home bag actually made to get you home? Is your get home bag geared towards dealing with an armed conflict scenario like what we just witnessed in Israel? Or is it a survival bag? Is it and this is something I've had to personally go inspect and review. My get home bag was way more geared towards survival, right? And why? I'm trying to get home. I'm not trying to go live in the woods like Grizzly Adams for the next 20 years. Why am I carrying around all this survival gear? I'm not trying to bushcraft my way back home. I need to get home. And the entire way home, in a cataclysmic scenario where I can't have my vehicle anymore, which, if you haven't noticed in Israel, everyone had to ditch their vehicles in certain areas very quickly. If I can't get to use my vehicle, it's because things are very bad. And if things are very bad, the entire way home is dangerous. My get home bag needs to be geared towards getting home alive, not living off the land for the next 7 days, right? So I'm trying to kind of restructure some of my thought process here. And we need to do that as a community, in my opinion, because I do not see things improving. And while this war around the world is just continually growing, we only raise our risk level higher and higher every single day. Okay. So my microphone still sucks. Is this really a problem? This is a nice microphone. It's a blue Nano. It should be good. Okay. Anyway, I spent a lot of money on this. Okay. Hey, if the sound is bad, let me know. I'm doing my best, but I have it in the same place and I have everything set up the same way I always do. So I'm not sure what's going on tonight. Doggone it says it sounds fine. Okay. So now, I do want to mention, I do have a supporter of the live stream, and that is Genesis Gold Group. So if you guys are interested in backing some of your assets with a stabilized asset like gold or silver, make sure you check out Genesis Gold Group. It's magicpreppergold.com if you want to check that out. They support the channel. They're helping me out when it comes to keeping things moving forward. And if you're wanting to make sure that you have some wealth either before or after an SHTF event or who knows what else, talk to them and see what they can do for you. I just put the link in the live chat. I'll put a link in the description as well as in the pinned comment. But they're helping support what I do here. And honestly, gold and silver historically have always helped a lot of people through hard times. And that's where a lot of us are these days. So Genesis Gold Group, a good group of guys over there, faith-driven. They're a Christian group if that floats your boat. And if you're not in line with that faith, they still will work with you because they're still going to do what they can for you. So talk to them. I'm not a financial advisor. Okay, moving on. And yes, I do find ways to try to support the channel financially because if you haven't noticed, the entire everything is more expensive. And when I say the entire everything, I mean it. Like every day, even me running this live stream, I don't know if you guys know this. I use StreamYard to run this live stream. It costs me $50 a month. So everything costs a lot. I don't know what else to say. So let me go ahead and move on to the next part of this conversation, which is the fog of war, right? As we lost 50 people because I decided to mention someone who financially supports the channel so we can do more of these conversations in the future. But that's just the way it works. Everyone's a capitalist until they're not, right? All right, so let's go ahead and talk about fog of war. Well, what's going on with the fog of war and international community? The Taliban has asked Iran for passage to join terror campaign in Israel. Interesting, okay? But there's more to this. Just hold on. I promise this isn't the only way we're going to approach this concept right here. And I'll take a quick drink of coffee. The Taliban has reportedly asked Iran for passage to Israel to help Hamas continue its terror against the Jewish state, according to multiple foreign media reports from October 7th. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Possibly some bias from their reporting, of course, so that's why we're going to check sources. And this is why it's a good example of fog of war. The Taliban has allegedly asked for passage to conquer Jerusalem if Iran, Jordan, and Iraq are willing to support their troops. Okay. Now, why am I saying that this is fog of war? Why is this an example of fog of war? I'll tell you right now. It's an example of fog of war because we also have, from Voya, Taliban deny claims they're trying to join Hamas on the battlefield. The Taliban have been forced to deny claims that they are trying to join Hamas fighters after a fake post on X social media platform claimed the Afghan militant group wants to travel to fight in the war. Analysts say this has put the Taliban into the difficult position of publicly backing away from active support for Hamas and possibly angering some of their own cadre. A social media account, Taliban Public Relations Department, which later changed its name to #FreePalestine, posted on Saturday that the Taliban contacted Iran, Iraq, and Jordan for passage to join Hamas in the ongoing fighting between the militant group and Israel. They're saying it's fake. They're saying they didn't request passage. Israel's press is saying that they did request passage. This is how fog of war works. And as you can see, both sides are actually benefiting from these reports, regardless of how you want to look at it. Israel's benefiting because people are having to say, well, are you doing it or not, Taliban? And the Taliban saying, well, wait, we didn't actually say we were going to do that. Well, why aren't you supporting the groups that you say you like to work with? Now what's going on? So you don't actually work with them anymore? Understand how this is information warfare. This is not verifiable information data. This is not something that we can use to our advantage in the sense of intelligence collection. This is for us to verify that there is, in fact, information warfare occurring and that this is a great example of this fog of war scenario. So we don't know for sure if they did or did not request this. We do know that this information can be used against both groups in many ways because if Taliban is saying that they're denying it, then they can go ahead and turn around and say, well, Israel's making this stuff up to try to make us fight each other, which shows that they are truly the enemy, and we should probably band together to do something about it. And Israel, of course, is saying, well, look, if they're looking for passage and they want to come here and fight us as well, then we need more international support, and we need to do more about what our current situation is because it's only going to get worse. So you can see how it can be used to both sides' advantage, and it is a great example of the fog of war that we're currently dealing with. Let's see here. Ginger, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I did not expect these. Ian and Ginger already did this to cover this live stream, so use this. Well, I appreciate it. I was not trying to ask anybody for money when I mentioned that. I think that this is something I want to just touch on when it comes to that real quick. The reason I take on sponsorships and I work with these companies, there's a couple reasons. One, I like the companies. I talk to the people involved with these companies and I make sure that they align with what it is that I align with. And they provide something to the preparedness community, which means if you consider precious metals important to your financial stability, then there you go, Genesis Gold Group. If you like to get a preparedness-related equipment and gear and things that are related to self-defense, then I work with Midway USA. There you go, right? I work with companies that are relevant to preparedness for that reason, but also so that I don't need to necessarily ask for financial support from everybody in the community. So I appreciate it, and I'm not trying to diminish what you did. I really appreciate it. I'm very humbled and grateful for these donations. But I just wanted to let everyone know that's not my intention by mentioning the cost of doing this live stream or anything along those lines. It's just that people forget even just running YouTube costs money. It's not free. Like there's a lot of time invested, a lot of energy. I have to pay for a lot of subscriptions and programs and all kinds of stuff, not to mention a lot of the gear and equipment that I review. So I appreciate the understanding there, and I do appreciate the direct support. But I also want everyone to keep in mind that I'm just as affected by inflation and everything else going on in the world, and I'm doing my best to navigate that while continuing with what I do here on the channel, and I hope that you find it valuable. So thank you all for that. Let's see here. Razorwire, I did see you mentioning that super big Army knife earlier, and I actually, who doesn't like a good Swiss Army knife? So maybe you're right. Maybe I do need to give the XXL a chance. That is quite a large knife, but it's got just about everything, and you might be onto something. So now let's talk about international involvement, because that is important just to kind of demonstrate how this is a global war and how this current situation in Israel right now is a battle of said war, not a war on its own. Okay, this is a battle. Okay, Are you a nerd? I am. I like Star Wars. Maybe not Disney era as much, but let's talk original Star Wars, right? The Battle of Hoth, the Battle of Endor, the Battle of Yavin, those were all battles within a war between the rebellion and the Empire. These are battles we're witnessing right now. The greater war is happening as well, but it's not decided by individual battles until the end of the war, right? So, who's involved and who else is part of this equation? Well, we have quite a few. Let's talk about the U.S. first, okay? What military aid the U.S. is sending to Israel after Hamas attack? Washington, which provides billions of military aid to Israel, annually sends military ships, aircraft after deadly attacks by Palestinian group, okay? All right. Navy ships. This is what's coming for Israel from the United States as of right now. So the U.S. is directly involved. Just so you're aware, we are 100% involved here. Like I said, we're at war. We are. We're not impervious to the retaliation of these actions either. Navy ships. The USS Gerald F. Ford Carrier Strike Group will be moved to the Eastern Mediterranean alongside its accompanying warships. The USS Ford is the U.S. Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, alongside being one of the largest in the world. The carrier hosts a guided missile cruiser and 4 guided missile destroyers. The U.S. is additionally sending USS Normandy, a guided missile cruiser, armed with naval guns and destroyers, USS Thompson-Hudner, USS Ramage, USS Carney, and USS Roosevelt. Austin said that the U.S. is augmenting Air Force F-35, the most advanced fighter jet in the world, along with the F-15, F-16, and A-10 fighter aircraft squadrons in the region. I do not understand in strategic military terms why the U.S. would send aircraft carriers with some 5,000 sailors on it and the most sophisticated aircraft in the world when Israel is more than capable of dealing with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, said Al Jazeera's senior political analyst Marwan Bashara. Bashara called the U.S. decision to move the Ford carrier a major escalation. Well, maybe it is, and maybe we're anticipating further involvement. I think that we should all be at least on alert when it comes to that level of involvement, okay? Now, don't forget, everyone else has friends too. Hamas sent high-level delegation to Moscow at Russia's invitation. This happened back in March. Okay, how long ago was March? Like 6 months, right? Okay, March 16th, this was reported. A high-level delegation visited Moscow recently at the invitation of the Russian government, the Palestinian resistance group said on Tuesday, and made the announcement while highlighting its standing among major global powers. Both Russia and China have good ties with Hamas, despite it being designated a terrorist organization by Israel and its allies in the West. The deputy head of the movement's political bureau, Saleh Arori, confirmed details of the official visit to Moscow. The leadership of the movement visited Moscow and met Sergei Lavrov. Al-Arari is reported as saying, "It was an important visit that highlights the role of the movement with many global actors." The Hamas official did not specify when the visit to Moscow took place, saying that it only happened recently. He then spoke about the possibility of another international trip in the coming weeks. A lot happened on that trip, I'm sure, but I want you to understand that they're directly involved with Russia and China, it turns out. What's some of the concerns with what's happening right now revolving around countries like Russia? Well, everyone's concerned that the war in Israel could push Russia and Iran even closer together. They already are together. So I'm not exactly sure what this all means, but European officials and experts are concerned that Russia could exploit the chaos surrounding the Hamas attack on Israel, pushing the Kremlin ever closer to Iran, which is allied with the Palestinian militant group. There is no sign that Russia provided material support or even had advance notice prior to the surprise attack on Saturday, which has left at least 900 Israelis dead and scores more kidnapped and taken into the Gaza Strip, where Israel had begun retaliatory strikes. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said on Monday that he'd ordered a full siege of the area. No power, no food, no gas. Everything is closed, he said. Okay. But Hamas receives significant backing from Iran, an increasingly close ally of the Kremlin that has provided thousands of suicide drones for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The attack on Israel, one of America's closest allies, not only has created the possibility of a two-front war in the Middle East, but has also stretched U.S. and European armories and political willpower. The crisis comes at a time when the West was already having trouble summoning more ammunition and money to support Ukraine's counteroffensive. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Now, China was mentioned, so we should talk about them. A lot of speculation right now that China is going to make a move here soon because of all the chaos. But likely, they're just going to enjoy the chaos. This article is from 2008. This is how far back these relationships go. And you should be aware of that because this isn't new. which means that these partnerships have existed for a very long time, which means they're strong alliances, which means they are all on the same team. The lines have been drawn. The war is already begun. We are in it. Please understand that. China has indicated it is not interested in investigating allegations that the Bank of China was involved in transferring money to Hamas for carrying out terrorist activities. In 2008, Bank of China may escape terror funding probe. Oh, 15 years ago, they were accused of funding Hamas. And here we are now. China is directly involved. The Chinese government has indicated it is not interested in investigating allegations, blah, blah, blah. We don't even have to go into this article. In all honesty, it just shows you that, yes, who funds these organizations? Who funds the chaos campaign that's being promoted around the world? Who funds this division that's occurring in our country as well as every other Western country? Generally, China. They're the world's bank at this point. China's economy is suffering right now. But you know who owes China a lot of money? The United States. Do you know who's never going to have the money to pay China? The United States. When China's economy crashes, where do you think they'll turn in order to recuperate some of their lost economy? I don't know, but I have a feeling that if they can't recuperate it, they're going to do other things to make everyone else suffer with them. And China has been funding so much of this for so long, at bare minimum since 2008. We know it goes back further than that. But what I wanted to demonstrate there is that all these groups are connected, which means everything that's happening right now is connected, which means that the World War III that we're currently in is spreading, and the battlefield is spreading, and the battles themselves are increasing and escalating to a degree that none of us wanted them to get to. We're in a bad spot. This is not how we want things to turn out. I don't want to see these things happening. Something else I want to mention, okay? And this is just something to consider. There's a lot of rhetoric out there on the internet right now. A lot of people are choosing sides, right? They're falling for it. And I'm sorry, but that is a lot of what is going on right now. You're falling for this campaign of division by choosing sides. Now, am I saying you shouldn't support what it is you believe in? Of course not. What I'm trying to let you know is that this is part of a campaign. And I'm seeing a lot of justification for some of the things that are happening over there right now on the internet. Here's what I want you to consider. And this is what I talked about earlier about human empathy, being able to empathize with some of the people that are affected by what's happening there right now. Your justification for what's happening there, to be able to say, hey, well, this country was involved in lots of criminal activity or militaristic activity that ended up in the loss of lots of civilian life, right? Okay. The United States, in their campaigns against other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, had their share of collateral damage, right? Not everyone who dies in a war is a soldier, no matter who is at war and no matter who's pulling the trigger. Innocent life is lost, always in a war. And so if your justification for what's happening there right now is based on the idea that this country has done things in the past that led to the loss of life of innocent civilians, so therefore they're getting what they deserve, well, then you can apply that same logic to the United States as well. And if you're trying to tell me that you'd be okay with other countries who we have definitely treated poorly through militaristic actions in the past, if you think it'd be okay for them to retaliate in the same fashion that we just witnessed in Israel here in the United States and act in that same barbaric fashion, then you are extremely misguided. I'm sorry, but it's true. Everyone could justify just about anything based on historical precedent, because you can always go back far enough to find things that you don't like about something, right? So all I'm trying to say is don't get caught up in that argument. Don't get caught up in those side-choosing scenarios. Think about how it would apply to you in your personal life. And don't get comfortable with your bias of security, okay? Please understand that you owning a gun doesn't keep you safe. One gun in the hands of one man does not win a fight against two guns in the hands of two men 95% of the time. If you're outgunned and outnumbered, you're already done. So you have to do more than that. You have to. It's just the case of the state of the world right now. Change your mindset to a mindset of preparedness for a wartime environment and stop assuming that it ends at canning food. Is canning food important? Yeah. We need to eat. You'll always need to eat. But we can't store enough food to last us forever. So you have to have a way to survive in that environment where you're eating your canned food to get to the finish line to where we can go back to actually having an open market once again, or whatever that ends up looking like, a barter community or whatever, a commune. I don't care what you figure out on the other side. But you can't live off of stored goods for your entire life unless you're like a millionaire, but even then you're not going to want to, right? So have what makes sense, store things away because it is important. You don't want to rely on anyone else for your necessities, but you also need to plan for how to get things back up and running. And you also need to plan for how you're going to survive the time in between X hour and when things get back up and running. Because the time between those two times is going to be dangerous and very scary. And if you don't have a plan in place and you're not of the right mindset now, if these things happen here, I'm not saying for sure they will, but there's a good chance that something could happen here, then when they happen or if they happen, you won't be able to react in a way that's going to be efficient. You'll have to have an entire 360 or a 180 or whatever degrees we need to deal with here when it comes to how you approach things. And trying to adapt to that is much more difficult than just trying to approach things at a meaningful pace now with a meaningful strategy, one step at a time towards being more well-rounded for that type of an environment. And I think that's why we actually need to have a little bit of that, game-changing attitude adjustment here in the preparedness community. For a very long time, it's just been about, the basic necessities, which makes a lot of sense. For me, the firearm stuff I do here on the channel is just mostly out of the passion I have for it. I just like it. It's a hobby. I have a good time with it, which means I have a decent amount of knowledge on the subject because I involve myself with it quite a bit. And I try to share that when I can and give whatever, nuance I can whenever I want to have that discussion. But it's turning into something more than that. And I think that's healthy because we're seeing where things are heading. And if you don't think that the streets of Chicago or Philadelphia or New York City are how other parts of the country are going to eventually look, then you have a very optimistic outlook, and I appreciate that about you. But I think we're heading more towards that, which means things will be even more ripe for a realistic attack at some point. And we have to be ready for it. So reevaluate. Is your get-home bag full of bushcraft gear? Are you set up to be making fires in the woods? Or is that fire going to get you killed because you decided to set up a fire during a hostile environment scenario, right? Is your equipment choices when it comes to self-defense appropriate for dealing with multiple attackers and people who have rifles rather than just a knife or a pistol? Is your belly gun going to actually be able to compete with somebody who has something much more formidable? I'm not telling you how to live your life or what you need to do in the sense of making changes, but I want you to at least consider these things, please, because I think you'll find that those gaps in your security can be easily fixed now, but might not be easily fixed in a different situation or environment. So let's see here. Razor wire, you're all set for flintlock rifles. I like that about you. That's old school, but it has its place, of course. We've got the Watchman saying position is key. You have to set up dead zones. Let's see. Savage Lee, I plan on living under a rock for a few years. Well, that's good to go. Trekker, Magic, I was a former combat soldier during the Cold War, but even with all my training and experience, I can't guarantee my family's safety without them being trained and ready. So, Trekker, I appreciate you bringing that anecdotal experience to the conversation. And I think that's something that a lot of us need a gut check or a reality check on. Hollywood has people believing that they're going to just be Rambo, right? And that's just not realistic. But the other side of that equation also is that there's been this movement towards, over like the 2010s, I would say, in the early or late 2000s, where people were very anti the idea of being tactical, right? Because it was like a fool's mission, and it was what mall ninjas did, and it had this cringe element to it. But get over that. I don't even care what those people think at this point. I'm doing what I'm going to do because it might be the difference of my family and I surviving versus not. And if it never ever comes to fruition, good. I thank you. That's exactly what I would hope for. But if it ever does, like, I would like to be at least to a different degree of capability than I am right now. So don't let other people dissuade you from trying to better yourself in that environment or that situation. And people will tell you all day long, don't listen to this guy. All you need is a 22 Derringer, and that'll deal with any situation you're going to run into. I guess until something happens where it doesn't. And at that point, you're going to wish you had anything other than a Derringer. In fact, I would probably rather have a big knife than a Derringer in that situation. I don't know what else to say. So, listen, I really appreciate all of you being here tonight. I really wanted to try to drive some of these concepts home. Please don't let this situation divide you. I honestly believe we lost some people tonight in this conversation because of their emotional attachment to the situation and their inability to separate themselves from the campaign of division and not hearing exactly what they want to hear from everybody who's having this discussion. That's not my goal or my job. I'm not here to just make you feel good about your personal beliefs. I'm trying my best to make you open your eyes to why you should be prepared for more than just the obvious. If you're part of the Subscribe Star, or if you're a YouTube channel member, the members only stream starts in like 2 minutes. So I guess I got to get going here. I appreciate every single one of you as always. I just linked the Subscribe Star in the live chat in case you're interested in joining us over there. It's $5 a month. We get exclusive content. I send out a preparedness incentive every month. It's worth more than $5. I guarantee you that. And it's just where people who want to support me directly like to go and hang out. So that's up to you if that's something you want to do. Obviously, a lot of us can't afford to do that these days, and I totally understand that. The other thing to keep in mind is that the members only hangout is more of a casual format. So I just hang out and we just chat and say whatever back and forth for a while. And that's what we're going to do here very shortly. That link is on the Subscribe Star page if you're a member, and it's on the community post. If you are a channel member, you can find it there on my channel page. Go to community, and then you'll see it. Anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.